Hey, Pags here at MEI Studio. This week we're looking at a technology that was developed in the mid-60s and has been all but forgotten today. We're looking at the AKG D200 and 202, this time on the mic locker. First, Happy New Year to everyone that's watching this when it releases. We just finished up a short run on some SDC mics when a manufacturer sent over some mics for evaluation that included another pair of SDCs. I wanted to take a break from them for a bit and cleanse the palate, so to speak, before hitting those, but boy are they pretty. As we saw in the MD441 video, the mid-60s was a time of innovation and experimentation in audio. Companies were trying new designs and trying to stay ahead of the curve. Some were digging up old ideas like the concept of the electret and making them viable thanks to new manufacturing methods and materials. While others like Electro Voice were trying to flatten the frequency response curve by developing things like the variable D system for their RE line of mics. AKG, meanwhile, was working hard on trying to bring a condenser-like response to dynamic microphones. And they were succeeding, launching a set of mics years ahead of the competition. In 1965, AKG applied for and was awarded a patent for a new concept in microphone technology, a dual diaphragm capsule. One small capsule was tailored to record sound above 500 Hz, and a larger capsule was designed to handle everything below 500 Hz. Some of the documentation puts the crossover frequency around 800, but marketing will be marketing. The first mic released with this design was the D202 in 1967, followed by the D224 and smaller D222 in 1968. A few years later, around 1970, the D200 hit the market, and later still the D200 Designation 1. If you see these mics in the wild, you might notice a designation after the model number, specifically an E or a C. The only difference between these mics is the type of connector that it has on the end, the C having a 3-pin DIN connector and the E having a Canon or XLR connector. AKG had a habit of doing this before the standardization of XLR, as Europe and the US were kind of headed down different paths with that. Why it took until 1990 for AES to choose a standard is beyond me. And yeah, in 1990. Prior to that, XLRs were being used, but depending on if you were in Europe or the US, pins 2 and 3 were opposite one another. And many manufacturers had been using XLR for decades prior to 1990, and it was becoming pretty much a standard, just the wiring was a little out of kilter. Prior to XLR, there were Tuchel connectors, DIN connectors, Canon Type O, Type P, UA, X, XL, XLR, and we almost had an XLP, but thankfully that didn't take off. It said, and I had been taught, that XLR stands for extra long reach because of its ability to carry a signal great distances with little to no noise, but turns out it's the X series, L for latching, and R for resilient polychloropyrene, a material that they embedded the pins in, aka plastic. I still haven't been able to get my hands on a reasonably priced D224, and from a bunch of people I've spoken to, it's not really recommended to purchase one without being able to hear it first, as the D224 had the capsules mounted on top of one another via a rigid mounting bracket, which is very susceptible to breaking. The wires connecting the base capsule are apparently extremely fragile also, and prone to breaking if you look at it funny. Speaking of the capsules mounting, where the D224 had a rigid mount, the D202 has a rubber mount to separate the two capsules, which helped their structural integrity, but was still extremely fragile. I'm going to explain what I mean by this a little bit later on, but I had some fun with a broken 202 and found out a whole bunch of funny things about it. Over time, the rubber can break down depending on how the mic is taken care of. The 224 and the 202 share the same treble capsule, but since the 202 body was wider, it could accommodate a larger base capsule. The 224, trying to look like an SDC, used a smaller element to fit within the limitations imposed by the body. The 202 used a similar sintered bronze head basket as the D190 that we saw in a previous video. This material helped keep out debris that could potentially cause issues with the dual element design. The body, however, is made out of, quote, special plastic compound, unquote, odd, The dual element mics all feature a crossover at 500 Hz, which AKG claims to be phase issue free. The diaphragms themselves are made from AKG's macrophol, or non-metallic material, aka plastic. The 202 features a bass roll-off of 0, 7, and -20 dB at 50 Hz, which should help get rid of any unwanted rumble, whereas the D200 and the D200E1 don't feature any onboard controls. The D202 had a reasonably flat response from 30 Hz to 15 kHz, or 16 kHz, or 18 kHz, depending on what year you read the spec sheets from. And the D200 claims to be almost dead flat in the same frequency range. Both the 202 and 200 are rated at 200 ohms, though some of the literature puts the 200 at 230 ohms. Again, yay marketing. And all the mics claim to be free of off-axis coloration up to 90 degrees from the center of the mic and are said to exhibit very little proximity effect. I have my doubts, though. Something to note, since the 202 claimed to have such an uncolored off-axis response, a special mount was created for boom use on television broadcasts and film. It's this big old crazy-looking shock mount that had a clip for the cable connection. Pretty wild looking. All of these mics in their day commanded a pretty decent price tag. In 1970, the D200E listed for $116, which is equivalent to about just under $1,000 in 2024. In addition to these mics, AKG was also building dual capsule mics for other brand names as well. Telefunken released the M611, and a company I've never even heard of, Uher, also had a mic, the M534, that was a dual diaphragm mic manufactured by AKG. So, if these mics were so perfect in their frequency response, why don't we see them being made today? After all, the RE20, the SM57, the MD421, and 441 are still being made today, and they all came out around the same time frame. The complexity of the design of the older D series, along with AKG's sale to Harman, who was looking to cut costs on everything they could, kind of helped put these mics out of commission. However, they still did have a few mics that used dual dynamic diaphragms into the late 90s, namely the D3600 kick mic, another mic that I can't seem to find one of. They also tried out a dual diaphragm condenser in the C4000B. Sony, however, is putting out a dual condenser single output mic like the C100. Toss in the myriad of cheaper condenser mics that you can get today, including AKG's own P or Perception line of mics, pretty much made the intricate and fragile designs obsolete. While the 421, 441, and RE20 are kind of complex in their own right, especially the 441, those mics definitely saw more of a market share over the decades than the AKG mics did, especially in the North American market. The AKG mics definitely saw more use and popularity in Europe, with some governments still using the 222 to this day. Fellow mic enthusiast Martin Mitchell wrote, quote, "The AKG D222 is very similar to the D202 with superb off-axis frequency response, allowing the speaker plenty of scope for ducking and weaving and dodging the issue." End quote. That's some fine British humor right there, folks. We have in the studio here an example of the D200E and the D200E1, and the D202. Kinda. The 200 and 200E1 picked up where the 202 and the 222 left off. Sound-wise, both 200s are very similar, if not the same, within tolerance. I want to note that the D200E1 was the last mic in the line and featured an added humbucking coil between the two elements to help reduce extraneous noise. It was also, for some reason, the least expensive of the D series when it came out, and it kind of feels it. The body feels very light and the finish is very odd. Almost, dare I say, cheap feeling. The years have worn ours away of the glossy outer finish, and it reveals a very light, shiny, almost plasticky feeling metal underneath. Let's bring these mics into the studio and see how good that off-axis coloration really is. I'm going to test them on voice and some other things that eat up a little bit more bandwidth. These mics are touted for sounding particularly good on snare and percussion, so we'll give that a go as well. We can check the low end on some bass, a little electric guitar, and some piano. Let's get to it. Before we get started with the demos, I wanted to talk about the 202s I had gotten in for this video. The mics were supposedly in working condition when I ordered them, and they certainly pass signal. However, if I plug the mic into a preamp, let's say the Neve with the 1200 ohm impedance selected, the mic sounds like this. If I go down to 300 ohms, it sounds like this. Now, if I go to a mic pre that has a higher impedance, say like around 3K that you might find on standard interfaces these days, the mic gets a little bit better. If you plug it into something that has a really high input impedance, say like an RPQ or something like that, the mic opens up and starts to sound a lot better. These mics are getting harder and harder to find, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure that this is working at its best, so I don't want to misrepresent the mic, but I'm going to do a couple of little tests with it just so you can kind of hear what's going on with this particular one, and I'm going to point out some things that I found. In doing my research on these mics, I found a fun argument about the ports on the back of the mic, these little guys down here. One person would claim that they're a sound input for the mics, and many other people poked fun at them, saying, no, that's ridiculous. Well, they do pick up sound. The ports back here are connected to the bass diaphragm through a long tube that runs up the body. This likely helps with directionality and may also work almost the way that the RE20's variable D works in helping to minimize the proximity effect. The mic certainly doesn't exhibit proximity effect like some other dynamics, and it certainly is a little bit more controlled than I've seen on others. This is the AKG D202 0 degrees on axis. This is the AKG D202 90 degrees off axis. This is the D202 180 degrees off axis. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. This is the D202 with my mouth pretty much touching the sintered bronze cap. This is the D202 about 6 inches from my mouth. This is the AKG D200E. This is the AKG D200E 0 degrees on axis. This is the AKG D200E 90 degrees off axis. This is the AKG D200E 180 degrees off axis. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. This is the AKG D200E really close to my mouth. This is the AKG D200E 6 inches away from my mouth. This is the AKG D200E1 0 degrees on axis. This is the AKG D200E1 90 degrees off axis. This is the AKG D200E1 180 degrees off axis. This is the AKG D200E1 6 inches away from my mouth. This is the AKG D200E1 very close to my mouth. We're going to test the off-axis coloration now a little bit. I'm going to keep talking and move the mic a little off, center, and see if the mic's tone changes. I'm expecting there to be a little bit of a volume drop, but according to the specs, the tone of the mic should stay the same. What do you think? While these mics do come up for sale frequently on eBay and Reverb and other used marketplaces, keep in mind that these mics don't age as well as a Shure or Sennheiser mic, for instance. While the RE20 has a foam rot issue, the AKG D202, 222, and 200 suffer from a rubber rot issue, causing the diaphragms of some of these mics to kind of rattle around. The D1000 also has this same issue, for what it's worth. The D224 and the 202 and the 222 have other fragility issues, as I've mentioned earlier as well. So just be careful with these mics if you have them on your wish list. Make sure you can return them if they're not functioning 100%, and if you can, listen to it before you buy it. And about that broken 202, the mic was DOA as I expected. I got it to try and replace the head basket on one of the other mics that I got, since the DOA one's head basket was pretty much pristine. After disassembling the mic as far as I could, I wasn't able to remove the capsule from the head basket. So there was no simple head basket swap that I could do. Frustrated from trying to get it out without damaging the capsule assembly, I finally took a hacksaw and cut the head basket in two. And it's here I found out a bunch of fun stuff about the mic. The head basket is glued to the capsule assembly, so getting it out is no easy task. I then proceeded to find out that the base capsule's diaphragm is held in place by a piece of cardboard. Yes, cardboard. And the treble capsule sits atop the base capsule in such a way that one good jolt in any direction could potentially sever the hair-like connections between the diaphragm and the pads that connect it to larger wires that go to the backside of the capsule. These mics are definitely way too brittle and fragile to be using live anymore from my experience with the bunch that I have here. The D200s, however, do seem to hold up quite a bit better than the 222s or the 202s, and certainly better than the 224s. Let's discuss that off-axis coloration, which I had my doubts about going into this. For voice, wasn't terribly noticeable, but on guitar cabinet, where we're using a lot wider bandwidth than a single voice, especially in the top end, where any dynamic mic, even an RE20, will start to exhibit an off-axis coloration, the bottom end stayed intact for the most part, but there's definitely coloration at 45 degrees and even more at 90 degrees. So much for the no off-axis coloration change at 90 degrees that the specs say. So for vocal applications, you can count on it to somewhat deliver on its claim, but anything more broad spectrum and you're going to be dealing with the laws of physics, as expected from a dynamic element. All of the old AKG D-series mics that we've looked at so far have a really unique and classic tone to them that you don't really find in modern mics. Many mics nowadays are tailored to serve a specific purpose or have a frequency response that can drastically color the source. These mics, they were being designed to be as flat as possible to allow whoever was behind the board to sculpt the tone of whatever they were putting in front of the mics or leave it as natural with little coloration as possible. While I love for a mic to sound good right out of the box, there is something to be said about having a mic that has a neutral as possible sound. It definitely leaves you with some more wiggle room for processing later on. I will say, in the past few months, I've broken out some of the older AKG mics that we've looked at on this channel for that crisp, dry 1970s drum sound, and even 50 years later, most of these don't disappoint. The D202 that I have here can probably be used as a kick drum mic in a pinch, and it's definitely easier to get in a porthole than a Beta 52 or a D112. What are your thoughts on these mics? Does anyone out there remember using them in their heyday and remember what they sound like? Anyone out there still using any of the classic AKG D-series mics? If so, what are you using them on? I'd love to hear some new or old creative ways these tools were used. And honestly, if you have a 202 and mine sounded somewhat correct, let me know, because I really like to know if this is doing what it's supposed to be doing. As always, if you've gotten anything from today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're interested in studio mics and other things audio related, hit that notify button so you'll be notified when we put up a new video. If you have any suggestions for a video or any questions regarding this one, again, please use that comment section or send us a message through our website. I'd love to hear from you. Well, that's it for this time. This is Pags, signing off.